Okay, prepare to be offended. So, one of the things that came to mind today was I do have specific trauma from the Bill Gothard group that trickled down to the Duggars, that trickled down to Doug Phillips, who was a homeschool guru guy who my aunt, uncle, cousins got involved with. And the short version of that story is they hijacked my grandpa's funeral. That was probably like one of the most traumatic things. I think the things that were the most traumatic about them hijacking my grandfather's funeral was the fact that my aunt and uncle and cousins were complicit in it. And they allowed it. And it was actually crafted, constructed, like they were behind the orchestrated. That was the word. They orchestrated this entire thing. And I remember, so we went to, this was in Texas. We went to the ceremony in my grandparents' church. Now, my grandma at this time was in the first stage of Alzheimer's. She's not really aware of what's going on. I don't know exactly how much, I know she knew my grandpa had passed, but I don't think she understood. And actually it was really fast. My grandpa had ended up going into the hospital for a fall, I believe. And he ended up getting to the hospital. They found that he was septic. And they also had cancer. And he ended up dying like within 48 hours. And I think he was just done. And it was so devastating. So this whole thing became orchestrated where I remember getting to the memorial service at the church. There was a lot of people that showed up, right? Now I know why. And my aunt and my uncle had orchestrated this entire thing for their cult leadership to come. And we had found out that my uncle had actually been stealing from my grandfather. And he had been saying that my grandpa had wanted him to have this money, which wasn't true. My grandpa had actually been confiding in my mom. Thank God my mom was the sole executor of his estate. Everything was in my mom's name. My mom, her background is in finance, thank God. Because then she knew what to do, how to navigate probate, like whether, obviously it wasn't going to go to probate because there was a will in place. So there's just a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. And so actually, the bank, because it was a small town, the bank in town actually knew my grandpa, and my uncle had gone in with my grandpa a week before my grandpa had died, and he had gone in to cash in one of my grandpa's CDs, and they suspected elder abuse at that point in time. And they actually did end up, I think either my mom reached out to them after she wondered where the CD went, or they reached out to my mom. I can't quite remember. It may have been, it doesn't make sense how they would have reached out to my mom to know how to reach out to my mom. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe my mom was actually on the account. I'm not sure. Anyway, short version is, you're trained at a bank to recognize elder abuse. And so my uncle had basically taken out the CD because he said that my grandpa wanted him to have it. And my grandfather disclosed to my mom before he had passed that wasn't true, that's not what he wanted. And I could be getting my timelines. It could have actually been 2 weeks before he had passed. I can't quite remember. I could talk to my mom about it. Again, we've hashed this out a million times over. And so we found out that they had been stealing from my grandfather. And then not only that, there had been people coming into the home that were taking care of my grandparents. My grandpa, I forgot to tell you this part. My grandpa was blind. My grandpa had a little bit of peripheral, but that was it. And so easy to take advantage of him, right? And he was also going deaf. So there had been a caretaker coming into the home who actually had a history. His name was Kevin, and I don't remember his wife's name, but they had a history of actually writing fraudulent checks and taking advantage of elderly people, couples, people, individuals, whatever you want to call it. And so oh man, this stuff is such a trigger for me still. So we didn't find this out till actually after my grandpa's funeral. So keep in mind, several of these pieces that I just said, we didn't actually find out till after the funeral. So we didn't know this was going to actually take place. And so they had been conspiring behind my mom's older sister, behind their backs. But this is my mom's younger sister. They had been conspiring behind my mom's back and behind my mom's older sister's back to bring these people to the funeral. What would be the point of that? Let's think about that. What's the point of bringing these people who have no affiliation with my grandparents? In fact, my grandparents, now my aunt and uncle are going to say different, but my grandparents had wanted nothing to do with this cult group that my aunt and uncle had become a part of. And so they had their own church they were a part of and loved their pastor. In fact, we got to know their pastor after my grandpa had passed. And he seems like a really lovely individual, truthfully, because he did have my grandpa's heart and in mind. My grandpa was grumpy. He wasn't the nicest to me or my sisters. Ironically, growing up, he actually favored my aunt and uncle and cousins. And then ironically at his deathbed, realized maybe on some level, maybe not, that we weren't actually out to get him, that you have these snakes in the grass that are trying to take advantage of him by taking their money. Now my cousins, I don't know how much my cousins remember. In many senses, they were victims to their childhood. And so I just want to say that I do love them and miss them. I'm very angry at my aunt and uncle. And my aunt is one of those meek women. It reminds me very much of Michelle Duggar, which there is a component of my aunt and my youngest cousin that involved Michelle Duggar. That's probably going to be for another story because I'm at 7 minutes here and I haven't even broken into the freaking funeral service. So the funeral service takes place. My uncle gets up and he starts giving this entire speech about how he is the son that my grandpa never had. My mom is vomiting in her mouth. My mom is also a harmony person, so she's not someone that would stand up and get in somebody's face like I would. But I'm so dumbfounded, and this is the thing I've noticed with my trauma. There are times that I will start raging and I'm a fighter. That's my normal nervous system response, is to fight. But then there's times when my trauma will take over and I freeze. And this was one of those times. And I was also trying to be respectful of my grandpa's funeral, but this church was packed. 300 plus people. My grandparents did not know these people. It was just not all the people from the church. We didn't figure out who all these people were until we got to the gravesite. Military. My grandpa was military. I also used to work for the Air Force. My grandpa was Navy. He was a crew chief. And so he was going to have a military funeral. Shows up. So we do the whole service. It was complete ridiculousness. And of course, my aunt is up there supporting him. My cousins say nothing. All females say nothing, because they've been taught not to. And then we get to the gravesite. What a cluster F. Okay, that's part one. I'm going to have to get into it next after this. Okay.